Hello, 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 hello. Welcome back. I'm just gonna go ahead and just welcome us into this space and do some Zoom logistics before we move on, okay? This is the Embody Lab 1 Day Summit, Healing Trauma with EMDR and Applied Neuroscience. My name is Oyemi Kali Ma'at, and I'll be your Zoom host for today's session. IFS Inspired EMDR, a magical evidence-based blend with Stacy. So with that, I'm gonna go ahead and invite Stacy on. Welcome, Stacy. It's all yours.
Oh, thank you so much. Let's see here. I guess my first thing is just saying hello. I love, love, love how everyone is from all over. So hello, beautiful healers, beautiful humans. I'm just thrilled to have you here and really integrating this work. I'm very passionate about this. So let's start with my slides because I have slides. I made them very colorful. And I do have the slides for all of you. So you should be able to find that. And I do make them pretty user-friendly purposely or strategically for you to take with you. And I also have handouts. So especially of the images that I made. So those of us, if you're like me, who really like imagery and have things stand out, I really tried to bring that together. So let's see here. There we go. Our first one. So this is IFS inspired EMDR. It really is parts work. And how do we integrate this holistically as well as somatically, embodying this with our EMDR? So taking a really beautiful holistic blend. So these are just some of the highlights and some of the benefits that I really have witnessed over the years and see of really kind of putting this in such a beautiful blend. But generally, clients will feel more understood when you can offer, and whether you use the parts language or not, you integrate this in your practice in the best way that works. There's something about really having this holism of recognizing the parts of us, or even recognizing the polarities within us, the conflicts within us, or the different values, the different experiences we hold. And it just broadens. We're multidimensional beings, right? We are multiplistic. We are not, we have so much more to all of us, right? So this honors the parts of us, and it also honors the essence within, or the essence that we can tap into energetically. It beautifully integrates with other therapies. And it really does look at the whole mind, body, spirit. So, or if you want to say the mind, the brain, the nervous system, the heart, the energy systems, the somatic, the body, and how it holds in. So we can come from all these different angles. It's very non-pathologizing and very empowering for our clients, or if you don't have clients, for ourselves, right? For ourselves and for the world. Like, this goes beyond. And so that is a really beautiful aspect of it. And I'll try to capture what I can in our short time today from that standpoint. And it's very creative as well, which is what drew me to it, was some of those factors. No more bypassing, shadowing, ignoring, repressing, which we all do. Like, that is part of, that's really universal. We may do it in different ways. We have cultural influences, we have family influences, we have system and oppressive influences, and we also have gifts and energies and influences from so many different things. So we may do this differently, but we often, as like young, it really comes out of Jung's work or some archetypal work, is we shadow, we exile parts of us due to the experiences that we've lived, as well as what we pick up epigenetically, as well as it could go beyond that, past lives, like whatever it is that our world views hold and can take in. And so this model and increasing, or just integrating this, you don't have to be an expert, but integrating some of this can really be like, how do we bring in all of us, right? Holistically, like our whole selves, and tap into energies that are beyond and expansive. And it really is meant to honor all perspectives, cultures. It honors legacy burdens, cultural burdens, things that we hold as well as our world views. And one of the things that really attracted me to this was the self energy, the component. I have studied many different types of parts work, and actually, they're all beautiful. They're all valuable and have some really validity to them. And there's a lot of ancient, none of this is actually new. All these things that we're teaching have been in ancient lineages and all over the world, but they're coming back in a new way. And what's really great is now we're having science support all this. But the self energy and whatever you can integrate that into your own worldview, but it's the energies we can all tap into, but they may be blocked. So when we come from what I call this IFS inspired and integrating that into our already EMDR robust models, we're going to look at core assumptions. We all have parts. Like this is universal from this standpoint, right? There isn't a difference. Like this isn't othering, like, oh, you have a lot of trauma, you have parts and I don't. We all have parts. It's actually natural, innate, and universal. We all have self energy, or we can tap into self energy. We all have that ability. Again, it can be blocked. We may not be able to access it, but it does, we all have it. So it is this innate wisdom, this universal love or unconditional love, and it is the ability to heal. Trauma disrupts this, right? So, and all of us have, you don't really get through being a human without some levels of trauma or some levels of burdens that come in, right? And also honoring that we may have a different range or different level of severity or accumulation, things of that nature. But trauma, when we say trauma, unresolved trauma, right, that is left unresolved because it wasn't held in the way it needed to be, because there weren't support, because there's other factors, it disrupts this natural adaptive information processing that we all can tap into. And so this is where, if we are healers, or if we're therapists, or if we have clients, or even with ourselves, we can bring this in and allow those connections to be made so we can heal. So in general, rule of thumb, more trauma, more extreme roles. And so what we mean by that is that the parts of us, again, it's not so much that it creates parts, it's that the parts become burdened. And the more trauma we have, the more accumulation of trauma we have, the more extreme the roles become for our parts, and the more separate our parts become. So present triggers then in the present moment, reactivate all that maladaptive stored information. And of course, that's neurobiological, that's in the body, that's actually in our energy systems as well. And then the parts of us work really hard to protect us from feeling these fragmented, very uncomfortable, or even very traumatizing emotions, body sensations, memories, and perceptions. So very importantly, and I love this community, what a beautiful community is. We're going to look at and honor in this model and in this integration of inclusivity. And so IFS inspired EMDR, really both communities and for us. And the way that we're going to do this work is going to honor that diversity, inclusivity, humility, cultural humility, and respect for all. So a premise is all parts welcome, right? That's an IFS credo, all parts welcome, but let's say all people's welcome. And And I'm going to extend it and go, all beings welcome, all pets welcome, all animals welcome, right? So the preface really is this welcoming, all welcome. And there's an acknowledgement, and it provides ways to address and work with not only our lived experiences, which of course are phenomenal and really important, and most of us do work on that, but we're also going to look at, like I said, those cultural and legacy burdens that we hold that are based on these different things, and that we can carry epigenetically, carry in our energy and body systems. We can carry from in womb things of these and really early experiences. We can also carry these through our lived experiences. So even if we're, say, adopted into a family, we can pick up those of the adopted family, or we can pick them up from the culture, from the systems, or from family or other important communities that we're involved in. And of course, there's gifts too. So I also want to honor the gifts that are also there and the burdens, right? But we recognize that. And then the commitment to welcoming all people and any race, age, religion, gender, identities, sexual orientations, class, abilities, language, cultural backgrounds, and more, right? Really expanding that out. So these centerpieces, self, this is what drew me to this model, was honestly the self, and how beautifully the incorporation of self was. And like I said, you can take your beliefs of what that is, and again, and if you're holding space for clients, what their beliefs, right? But it's really it's more the essence, is a way to kind of start to conceptualize that. But self is the centerpiece, right? So it's almost Thanksgiving. You think of Thanksgiving, and or you think of some other holiday. If you don't celebrate Thanksgiving, you think of like community getting together and food. And maybe there's this beautiful centerpiece in the middle that kind of represents what you're holding or what you're celebrating. Maybe you're celebrating a holiday, or you're celebrating someone within your community or your family. And so just imagine this really beautiful centerpiece and holding that, and then that's self, right? And then there's everything else around it. So it is a different resonance energy than parts of us. So self is not a part. Self knows that we're all connected, and that there is oneness, that we're all interconnected, and can tap into the expansiveness. Self is an active and compassionate leader. And so even within our systems, when self energy emerges, we can be both active and compassionate at the same time. It's really the core seat of our consciousness. So it brings us into a more embodied consciousness, and it's expansive and it's limitless. Parts are resources. So parts, the evolution, is like the old paradigm was almost like, oh, parts or ego or these things, leave it behind. And that's like an exile and a shadowing as well. And as we evolve and we become more conscious, it's more about embodying all parts of us to come with us. So if we evolve and we go into a higher consciousness, how do we embody that? And all of the whole self, all of us, all of our parts, all of our fragments that get scattered out, is bring them back, embody it, and become conscious and raise that together. And all parts of us have self energy at the core. They may be very burdened, they may be in extreme roles, right? But at the core, they also hold and have self energy. So and these are the 8 C's in IFS, and how do we bring these in? And you can use different words, of course, that would represent these states, these qualities, these energies. But for learning purposes, it's neat to have the 8 C's, because it's helpful to kind of remember these visuals. Like I said, I have for you in handouts and whatnot. So these self qualities are states of like clarity, right? Clarity, being able to tap into clarity, creativity, a centeredness or calmness, right? To be connected. When we even talk about like polyvagal, things like that, getting that ventral vagal and being able to connect and be in social engagement, to have confidence, right? Not arrogance, but confidence, like a confident enough, like I am good enough, I'm here, to be able to shine our light and bring it through. And then, of course, compassion, unconditional love, like the different terms for really being in that energy of really true compassion and curiosity. Curiosity, to go into that curious mind, that beginner's mind, these different ways, and just be curious with something is an amazing energy to open into. And then, of course, courage, right? Being courageous. Like courage is really moving forward and doing something, even though it may bring fear. So it is love over fear, right? And it's courage. How can we embody more courage and authenticity? It often moves us into authenticity and experiences like that. So the power of self, body-based experimental exercise. So we're going to just do a mini exercise here of I do a lot of like tapping in and resources. And so there's no reason, and all of us can participate in this. So, regardless of what type of therapist you are, or healer, or if you're not a healer, you want to use this on your own, this is really a safe, gentle way of kind of starting to embody some of these qualities. So, if we go back, why don't you each just pick one quality that you would like to attempt to tap into today? And if you have a different word that's more meaningful for you or something else that comes into your awareness, use that. That is totally fine. There is no right or wrong. Or if you just want to observe this, that's fine too. There's no right or wrong, whatever feels good to you and your system. But if you just take one of these and just relax into your body. If you want to soften your eyes, or if it feels okay to close your eyes, again, whatever feels good for your system. If you're laying down or you're sitting down, just anchor your feet, anchor the back of your legs, anchor your bottom, wherever you're sitting into imagine even into the earth, and just take a couple conscious breaths. And whatever word just sat with you, resonated with you, I want you just to bring that in. You can softly say it. You can imagine it being a light or a color and coming into your body. You can just bring in a felt sense of what that word means to you, or if there's any experiences you can connect to that maybe awaken that way of feeling. And just take a couple more conscious breaths in your body, around your body, your energy centers. And when and if you can tap into this sense, I want you to concentrate and focus on that. So, whatever this quality is, if not, if you are not tapping into that right now, then I would just encourage you not to tap, but just to be with yourself and consciously breathe. For those of you have tapped into this, even a small amount, I want you to focus on that small amount. I want you to focus on whatever that is that's neutral or positive to you. Just relax your shoulders back. Notice in your body, notice in your energy. And if you have something you connect to that's positive, I just want you to take your hands and you can either just tap, you're going to tap alternately on your arms, or if it feels better on your thighs or your knees. You could do it on a surface or a pillow, whatever feels good to you. And you're just going to alternately tap one side then the other. And just notice the sense or focus of what is feeling positive to you in some way. And then take a breath. Away. And just tap back in, see if you can bring yourself again into, just see what it brings. Use your word. Connect with what you can connect with. And when you have it, when you notice it, or if you notice it, then you can tap. And take a breath. We'll just do one more. So again, just go into your body, your energy field. Bring your word in whatever way you can. Take a moment, see if you can connect. And whenever you feel connected to that in any way that shows up for you, and that feels neutral or positive for you, just tap. And take a breath. And just gently come back to the space, to each other. And just know you can do this anytime with yourself. If you've noticed, you bring in what we would say self qualities or positive qualities, or and with your clients. Like even in the room, like if my client also says they did something, I'll be like, wow, notice that took courage, right? Like notice that took courage to do what you did. Can you drop into that courage? Can you feel that courage? Right? And so you might be pointing that out, reflecting it back. Or can you be curious with this? And if your client can start to tune into it in some way, right? And you can use your own, like whatever ways you would do that. Can you be with that sense of curiosity? Can you focus and notice that curiosity? Or can you notice feeling compassion towards yourself or another? And you can do this in the imagination, in the lived experience, or as they're talking about whatever they're talking about, pointing this in. And then you can always bring that in. You could bring it in, just the somatic awareness is powerful, right? You don't have to have the tapping, but the tapping really does help bring in, that sense, that mindfulness around it, and engaging those hemispheres of the brain, engaging the neural networks, like trying to like bring in more adaptive neural networks for our clients and for ourselves. A really beautiful way of working with self. So more about self and what we call self-leadership. Really a big part of it if in the therapy, and again, if you're not, or in whatever modality or whatever you use with clients or for yourself, is that you tap into self energy. So, and for your parts, for your clients, for the world, right? So this is, if anything you walk away with today, I hope it's some self energy and however you conceive that and conceptualize that and bringing that in. So the therapist self energy holds sacred healing space. That in itself is huge, right? And if we can come from self energy, that in itself is what you might say an intervention. The client self intuits what is needed to heal, right? So we hold that. Our self energy knows the client can intuitive, whether the client feels like they can or not, or they're able to at this time. They may not be able to yet, but we hold that space. And it's not really us being the experts, it's us opening the space and helping them to bring in and emerge that, because they do have that ability. The therapist self stays attuned to the client's parts and or our own parts, right? So attunement is huge. Like just stay attuned. And if not, right, then we go into those repairs or we come back. Like we're not perfect, right? They're not perfect. Nobody is, right? So the attunement, we recognize, we stay aware, and we bring back, right? So whatever needs to be done, we model self energy as much as we can, and we allow the client self to emerge when they're ready at their pace. And we trust that the client self has the answers, even if they don't in the moment, right? But we know that that is possible, and we hold that possibility. So how, like for as a therapist, how do we bring in a self-led therapist, right? Self into our work, into our EMDR work, or whatever work we're doing, or even just into our own lives. And so there's 5 Ps, right? Like in teaching, there's always like acronyms, or there's the 5 Ps, the 8 Cs, these different ways, but it's presence, right? We bring space, we bring presence, we bring patience, right? And we ask our impatient parts, because of course, that's probably pretty normal. And I would say most of us probably have some impatience that can come in the room. We ask that to soften back. We bring perspective, seeing the bigger picture, coming from that eagle's view, right? The eagle's eye. And knowing our client, even if they're very, very blended and in a part of them, they are not that part. They're much more dynamic than that, right? And parts are not their roles. They may appear to be their roles because they've gotten stuck in these extreme roles, but they're more than that. And we are persistent. So there is a sense of activity with self. Self is not just the being state in itself. It's a accumulation and a balance of this. But so we're persistent, not enforcing. No forcing, no forcing. Self doesn't force, but there's a fearless hope merchant in the self energy. There is the courageousness. There is this confidence that comes through. And then there's playfulness, right? Like we're all together in this at some level. And if we can tap into that and be playful and warm, and we can be intuitive, we can be spontaneous, we can be creative. So how do we distinguish self from parts, like in our clients and ourselves? So one of the kind of rules of thumb, and one of the best ways, is if there's an agenda, right? So if we're in our own system and there's an agenda at play, that cues us in that it's a part. Same with clients, if there's an agenda. So we're always looking, is there some kind of agenda behind it? And that's a part. And it's just to distinguish that. There's nothing wrong with that, right? But it's just to distinguish that, so that when we're trying to find self energy and what we call unblend that and bring that through, whether for us and or the client, we're going to look for that. Self really doesn't have an agenda. Self is very spacious. But self does want to restore balance and wholeness. Self does want to bring healing. Self is naturally inclined to help all parts, even the extreme parts, even the parts that other parts may not like, things of that nature. Self is greater than the sum of all parts. And it's connecting to what we might call a larger true self, and whatever, again, that opens for you or your clients. Self must be embodied to lead. So these somatics that we're talking about in the Body Lab brings in so beautifully, and all of these other presenters are going to bring in so beautifully. It really is about the embodying of that energy, bringing that up and through. And the other thing we do is we can consider the degree of self energy. Like And maybe you do that in percentage. Maybe you do that in a lot, little, like, or maybe you're with children and you can be really creative and use really creative ways to somehow get like this degree of, but it doesn't, I mean, we don't have to be in 100%, right? Self energy. The world is going to constantly be bringing us out as well. So we just bring in as much as we can. And what degree do we have enough self energy, right? And we can always foster, grow, practice this. So again, coming back to attunement and how key attunement is, right? And coming from these self qualities and compassion and connecting and feeling understood. That's a human universal need. So that also goes universally as feeling understood. We really want to have non-judgmental, non-shaming environments and how key that really is. And we repair when needed. We come back, we repair, we check in, we ask with our clients. If we ask, if we're in question, just ask your client, reattune, connect, or reflect back and see if you're getting it, right? Am I getting this right? Things of that, and take accountability for our own systems. We speak for our own parts, right, as a therapist, and we take accountability. We stay aware of our own and our clients' body language and underlying expressions, and we be creative and intuitive. And again, ask if you're in question, just ask the client, ask the part, ask yourself internally. So mind and brain, there's like a differentiation between mind and brain in this, right? And that much of what we're talking about could go into much deeper discussions, but just to kind of sum that is, mind is the energetic flow of thoughts, feelings, body sensations. So the mind is pretty expansive. It is not just in the brain, right? The mind and the brain is the structures, it's the organ, right? And so at this point, I'm talking about the head brain, because I mean, we can really conceptualize that we have a head brain, a heart brain, and a gut brain. But the head brain, right, is structures such as the amygdala, the hippocampus, the hemispheres, the prefrontal cortex, and on and on. So effective therapy rewires or changes the brain and works with the brain, hence related right to the nervous system, as well as the energy systems like the chakras and the meridians, the nervous system. So intercorrelated. And IFS informed EMDR uses both mind and body towards embodiment, right? So we're going to use both. And the mind is we bring in that interceptive awareness so we can focus our attention to, for example, internally find a part, or internally connect with body sensations, or internally connect with what's coming up in our awareness in our bodies and around our bodies. And the brain is really those unintegrated, dysregulated, or those adaptive integrated neural networks. And we're going to work with those, right? We're going to try to bring in those adaptive and move out what's been unintegrated or integrate them. And that includes all of those nervous system reactions and stuck energies that can come out of our body, and body sensations, in emotions, in these different ways, in heat, different ways that they can show up for our clients and ourselves. So how do we conceptualize using the mind and brain in this kind of IFS informed EMDR trauma, integrative approach, right? Is parts live in the mind and the body. So what IFS has protectors, exiles, they live in the mind and the body. So they're going to come up through the mind and the body. Self is not localized, rather it's an energetic state of being. Self connects with those adaptive and integrative neural networks. So self energy is the most healing force because it has that potential for us to connect or reconnect in that way. Parts connect. So parts are connected to these unintegrated and dysregulated or fragmented neural networks that are frozen in trauma time. The parts are stuck in those. And they're stuck in these nervous system reactions that you're going to hear more about in some of these preceding trainings as well. So I think hopefully that'll all kind of integrate for all of you. Exiles, what we call the wounded parts of us, live in implicit memory. So they're unconscious, frozen in time, frozen in the consciousness of the time of trauma. And they express through our bodies, our minds, and our energy fields. So protectors, what we call protective parts of us, how do protective parts use the mind and the brain? They're rooted in the sympathetic hyperarousal and the parasympathetic hypoarousal nervous system reaction. So they show up like that. We get triggered. We might be in hyperarousal, hypoarousal, or actually have both going on within our systems at the same time. So they're blended, right? When these blended parts are in, say, hyperarousal, they blend with us, and our prefrontal cortex goes dormant. It starts to go offline, and this is what we may call dysregulation or the feelings, right? Or these blended parts that are in this hypoarousal, the prefrontal cortex, the emotional centers and say our midbrain centers in our limbic system, and our body sensations go offline. And now we have what we might say shut down, numb, depressive responses. We're not connecting. So how do exiles show up? They live again in that implicit unconscious. They live in the unconscious. And of course, as many of us know and have all experienced, let's be real, right? Our unconscious driving the bus, right? Our unconscious can drive the bus. And so it's really important as we get to these healings and healing these exile and this unconscious so it can come forward and move out. But they're very emotionally charged parts of us that because they hold the emotional charge. They're not that, but they hold it and it's frozen in time. So once the exiled or the wounded parts of us can connect to self-energy, like our self-energy, healing begins. I mean, it just begins just even from that. And of course, then we can have strategies to do that. So we call that in IFS unburdening. It's the synaptic memory reconciliation and the emotional charges can be released through the body. Oh, so nice, right? Like if you see, like you start moving that energy. Now, of course, we have to hold that space so that people can let that come up and through because that can be really difficult. And to connect to these body sensations as they release the fight responses, the flight responses, the shutdown responses, the things that need to kind of move and shift. So we access, that's one of our words, right? And even in EMDR, we access these XL neural networks. We reactivate it without reliving it. We don't want to be reliving it. We want to light it up and reactivate it so we can reprocess it. We release the burdens that are held into the body and the energy, and then we integrate the new learning and the adaptive information. So how do we relate to parts? Like some of you may be like, I've never really worked with parts or thought of that. And some of you may be using it. And so you might be at very different levels of that, right? But clinically or even internally in our own systems, we relate to parts, you relate to parts as people, right? They have their own autonomy, their own roles, their own ways of being. And we can externalize that to work with that, right? Knowing they're a part of a whole system of one person. Other terms for parts, and there's more, right? There may be many others, but these are just some ideas. You don't have to use the word parts, right? That's just the word that is used commonly with IFS but ego states, schemas, ego, archetypes, alters, etc. And again, if you use the language with your client, use what resonates with your client too. And remember, clients may see, I think it's 70 to 80% that has kind of been conceptualized in the IFS world through some of the research and stuff can see. They can hear inner voices that are parts. They can feel body sensations and physical symptoms. Like my parts come up really somatically. I'm a big somatic person. Even the first time I ever did EMDR, I was like, whoa, like my body just went right into these sensations. So all of us are different, right? But they can feel into, they can remember, have memories. So it shows up as remembering things. Parts can show up as visual images or words that you can see like visually, and they can show up in our dreams. So we might want to speak for parts and help our clients learn how to speak for their parts. We map parts so we can map out and get to know parts and unblend them. We can make notes of parts, like, so whether it clinically, you can make note. I do that a lot. I just kind of make notes and jot them down. And if I ever need to go back, then for the parts, but you can do this. You can be really creative. You can journal, or your clients can journal. They can map, they can draw. I mean, there's so many different ways we can relate to, externalize, and work with parts. So, and these visuals you have in your handouts, because I know like we're limited on time. So I have all these visuals for you and created them in Canva. I kind of geek out on that. It's actually really fun for me. So it's kind of fun to do these, but just to give this conceptualization. And so we have self as kind of the trunk, the core, right? That center piece of the tree. And like we were talking about, self is kind of the core essence. It's really the most healing force, the most healing energy, right? The managers and the firefighters, the protective parts. So we have them kind of on top here in the branches. And the managers work proactively. So there's a key, they're proactive. They're the parts of us that proactively try to get us to run daily life, function, or do or not do. But their roles are generally when we're burdened, their roles are to prevent the emotional pain from coming up. And so these parts of us get us to do things or not do things to protect us, right? So there's this proactive energy, like the inner critic, the perfectionism, it could even be the part that isn't going to have you go somewhere. Avoid going there, right? Like you're going to get hurt or you're going to get abandoned, or, so these different ways. And of course, there's many others, but they're proactive. And then there's the firefighters, and they are going to put out the fires. So that's hence the firefighter language, right? So if something comes up internally and it feels like a crisis, or it's the exhale wounds coming up and it's overwhelming, and what the managers normally do isn't working, then these firefighter parts come in and they'll do whatever. They're reactive, right? They'll do whatever to put out the internal fire. So they're often not as acceptable in their ways of doing things, right? And the more burdens, they become extreme. So they could be doing very extreme things like our suicidal parts, our self-harming parts, our substance abuse parts, or binging parts, things like that, to try to control and regulate our system. And then there's the exiled, the wounded, the young, vulnerable parts of us that really hold all those trauma memories or trauma charge, the nervous system charges, and their overwhelmed neglect that they've been through. And they are isolated, hence shadowed, exiled out, and they continue because of that exiling, which served you or the person at the time probably no longer serves us because it's frozen in. And so without that healing, this can come up anytime for us, right? And comes up often very intrusively. So they carry the heaviest burdens. So the burden system, and that was really from that kind of more burden system view, parts become extreme because they carry those heavy burdens. They're often frozen in trauma time, right? At a consciousness of the time of when they got stuck. They're like computer viruses. Parts can take over and drive the bus. They can distort and take over, right? And that's kind of the role that they fell into. The goal is to release the emotionally charged burdens from your body, your mind, and your soul. And then again, the legacy burdens, they're passed down from the ancestors. Epigenetically, we now have research that supports up to 7 generations, right? So that this carries through, and in my experience working with clients, I work a lot with legacy burdens and really love doing that work. And it goes like it'll often go back further and further and just kind of release all the way back through. So it's kind of amazing, but science now supports that the cultural burdens that are observed through the culture and associated systems. So then we look at the envision the unburdened system. What does that look like? Well, the managers are proactive, but they're collaborative, right? They don't have to be in these extreme roles. So they still help us, right? Like our therapist part or our intellectual parts that help us get through all these trainings and, and whatever. But the other thing too is they have a role. When they're unburdened, they can go back to their original. And so it might be something different too. You might have a part that is like a very intellectual part. And when the unburdening happens, that part maybe actually wants to do something else in your system. So it can be really interesting how it can shift us and transform us internally. But they help us regardless. They generally help us towards growth and mastery. And they can be the kind of loving parent within. And problem solvers. The firefighters then can communicate with self, and they can give us passion and humor and adventure and healthy rebellion and creativity and courage. And the exiles give us these beautiful playfulness and curiosity, joy, openness. They help us connect and just be warmth and bring in all these beautiful, like tender, spontaneous, and trusting qualities. And then self, of course, just shines real more brightly and is more easily accessed in the systems. So IFS inspired EMDR communications, if we integrate the communication, we have insight, which is client self to part. So this is, or if it's our system, it's our self energy communicating to our parts, working with our parts. Direct access is the therapist self works with the client's parts or parts. It could even just look like what we're thinking, like whatever we do in our normal therapy, right? We're just connecting, but we're coming from our self energy, and we hold we kind of know of and learn the parts. And then we can also externalize parts more concretely through art, creative arts, sand tray, figurines, drawing, pillows, any other mediums that you may use, toys, objects, and externalize the parts to work. So you can work in this insightful way where the self works right with the parts, or it's the therapist self working with the client, conceptualizing the parts, or externalizing. So you have these 3 communication methods that you can use, and it's dynamic. You can go in and out of these as well. So very important to speak for parts. Speaking for our parts, not from them. This creates safety and it identifies what's important to the parts, right? Because we can have parts that different things are important to different parts. It helps parts express and feel understood, which really helps regulation. It already helps build distress tolerance and regulation in the system. It enables us to speak in respectful ways to and to others, right? And to ourselves, to others, to the world. It increases connection with self and others, and it helps us access different perspectives. So widens our perspectives and our view because we're speaking for parts rather than of them. And that's a practice. That's an ongoing, really potentially lifelong practice, but we practice it. And it's very helpful for us. It's very helpful for our clients. And then our goal, we want to bring more inner collaboration. Our inner systems, when burdened, will look very much like the families that we grew up in or the systems and the cultures we grew up in. And again, there could be many gifts from that, but that we could also have all the dysfunction. And so we want to bring in more inner collaboration, more harmony, and more what we would say maybe skills functioning, so that there's a healthier functioning internally in our own family system. So we find polarized parts that are having power struggles and conflict internally, and we help them to collaborate. And we focus one part at a time, so it's not so overwhelming, and letting know, okay, we'll come back to the other parts. All will be heard, just like you would do like in a community or a group setting, right? But we do it internally. We reassure the parts that we won't collude with one side or the other. That's that. So as a self-led therapist, we're not colluding with this part or this way of being. We're staying neutral, and we're allowing all to kind of come up so it can be seen and heard and worked through in whatever way. So we are mediators. Our self can mediate in a really healthy way and give a lot of space for that. We help parts share their concerns with each other, and we build inner collaboration and self-led resolution. So let's look at this in the 8 phases. Let's bring this, how do we do IFS inspired EMDR phases and the 8 phases, and how does that integrate into the AIP model, or the adaptive information processing model that is the cornerstone of EMDR therapy for those of you who maybe aren't EMDR therapists. So here's a flow, right? Is like, so if we look at it in stages, first we look at our phases, understand the client, get to know, understand your client, engage and build trust with your client, resource, right? Build those resources, do preparation work for like deeper depth work, deeper somatic work, deeper trauma processing or desensitization work, and unblend, help unblend the system. And we get permission. This is key. We get permission from the protective parts. Believe me, your EMDR will go so much better too when you know you have permission from, like, if there's self-energy there, enough self-energy, and there's permission from the protective parts, then EMDR processing or therapy or deeper depth work, whatever that is that you're doing, will go much smoother. And we find those targets, right? Like, what's the target assessment? And then we witness, right? And we have the client self and the therapist self witness the process. We witness what's coming up. And then we can retrieve and unburden parts, the experience. We can do do-overs. We can do attachment work within there. And then we go through the body to see, are there any residuals left within the body scan. And we also add in inviting in positive qualities and gifts, so that whatever's unburdened gives space for something, so we intentionally can invite in. And again, it could just happen in the MDR processing, but we can interweave that in, we can work that in, and we can reinforce that and deepen it. And then we integrate and reevaluate the work. So phase 1, you want it to be meaningful. We want meaningful intention goals, and we want to set expectations. We want to gather at what is comfortable. We do not have to gather details that our clients are not ready for, but we want to get some case conceptualization and some idea of history, trauma, and gifts, lived cultural legacy, and beyond, right? We want to express accurate empathy and validation. Start to connect. We want to assess the resources and the constraints that the client has, or the therapy has, or we have, if we're working with our own. And we want to start that case conceptualization and begin treatment planning. I feel like treatment planning is much more dynamic than saying it's just within this, but of course, if you work with insurance, it's all those things, build your treatment plan, whatnot, but it's an ongoing dynamic thing between you and your client. Then we want to engage and build trust, rapport, connection, attunement. We reflect Parks language back whenever possible, and see if like we're hearing that right. Like, for example, you're in the room with your clients, like, am I getting this right? It sounds like maybe a part of you really wants to leave your partner, but another part of you really wants to stay and really cares and loves from your partner or something like that, right? So you're reflecting back in this way so that the client can hold what's happening more. We build that trust and safety and that neuroception, a feeling that the client can feel safe enough in the therapy space, or our own systems can feel safe enough to do whatever piece of work that we're working on or to go inward. And then we develop a parts detector and a self detector. So as a therapist, we can do that in our own systems as well as we're just detecting parts, right? And we're detecting self energy for ourselves and for our clients. We go at the client's pace. We soften our parts back in a kind, gentle, but also assertive way. And we let go of agendas. Power struggles and agendas really do not help therapy. Psychoeducation and introduce whatever you're working on, IFS inspired EMDR, whatever, right? And then we stabilize. Obviously, if the client needs stabilization, safety first, stabilization. So then the resourcing the client, we do mapping, resourcing, and unblending. So we could do our peaceful place exercise, we can do body scans or muscle relaxation techniques, right? You can do vagal toning exercises and any other somatic techniques that you may bring in or other resources that you bring in. We can do resource development installation for those of you who know what that is. Those are like tapping in resources and using BLS to bring in resources to help bring in more felt sense of resources for the person, RDI. If your client is unable to feel positive, use positive affect tolerance protocol. And then we'll do attachment-based internal resources, and you may also develop coping skills, CBT, DBT, ACT, whatever, coping skills. And then we can begin to map the system, see it from a broader perspective. So we're going to look at the complex relational dynamics that happen within and the event, the issues, the aspirations, explore parts. And remember, it can be difficult to track, and that's okay. You don't have to be perfect at this. You can always ask your client, you can check back, you can make notes. This is very helpful to start to map for the therapist as well as the client, and it really does go through and help all the different kind of stages of life too. So it's relevant to if you're working with kids, adults, teens. And we track cycles, patterns, and sequences that we're seeing. When you feel criticized by your partner, a part of you feels hurt and another part defends you by snapping back. Am I getting that right? So again, we do a lot of that reflection, right? So that's an example of noticing that and reflecting that and being with it, with the self energy compassionately. Phase 3, we externalize the parts in the session and we be creative. We may draw, paint, art. We reflect back, just like we were saying. We can use objects to represent parts and work through that way. We can use our other therapeutic tools, clay, sand tray. There's IFS tools like an inverted triangle, and you can even draw out those things or talk about it, work together of managers and firefighters and what parts those may be or what roles are noticed, and then the exiles and the self, and even draw that out or or even have a handout. You can use parts or archetypal cards. Like I have these interactive archetypal cards that are all these different parts. So you can be really creative of working and helping clients with this or ourselves. So a really big, and again, that we could go so much more into this, but is unblending the system. So you use the 6Fs to unblend the system. And that is to find, to focus in, to flesh out, to how do you feel towards this part, and then continue to ask questions, get to know and befriend the parts, and then we address their fears and concerns. So we find the part, we focus in, we flesh it out, right? So we can be with it, and then we see, oh, how do you feel towards this part? And that's how we distinguish if there's self energy or if there's not. And then we start to befriend, get to know the part, and then we address those fears and concerns. So core question, how do you feel towards this part? That's a core question that you ask to get and see if the client has self energy, or if ourselves, if you're tuning in, like, how do I feel about this part of myself, right? And we can unblend so we can eventually emerge some self energy. So we can ask internally ourselves or our client, are you willing to soften back? So we ask that part, or we say to the client, can you see if that part will soften back to give you some space. Give some space for this work, or can you witness and take a break? Or we can ask our own parts, can you step back and let me kind of work with whatever's happening, or with this client, or with myself. And then we give lots of love and appreciation for the softening back, right? And we check back with these parts, right? Because we're working holistically. We're not trying, we're externalizing and focusing so that we can do work, but we're bringing it back all together. And if a part keeps jumping back in, that's the part that you target. You work with that part. Then what's the concerns? What's the fears? Permission. This is a huge part. Permission and target. Identify a target event, issue, part, or memory that you want to work on. Address the fears and concerns of any parts that are concerned on working. So that, and then you could do blocking beliefs in EMDR work, but you can also just check in with cards, or check inside. Are there any concerns to working with this before you go into trauma processing? And please give a voice and speak for those concerns so we can address them. This will be much more effective in our work together as we move forward. So, and then you get that permission, like, oh, apprehension's okay. Like, but I'll say to my client, like, okay, there's some apprehension, but is it okay if we still move forward and we check back with that apprehension, right? But you get a no, that's a no. Like, respect no's, respect your clients, respect their systems, respect their pace, right? No permission, you just target the protective part, you build trust, you get to know it, you go back to resourcing, you go back to all of that, you unblend more, you build more self-capacity. And you can identify those blocking beliefs and work with those. And then phase 5, we start to witness the story. So we may be using BLS, trauma processing, witnessing. If we're using EMDR, right, we'll add the BLS, but we guide self-energy through that whole thing. And we may use interweaves to keep connecting, bringing in, make sure that self-energy is there. We unblend the protectors as they come up. If there is blocking or looping or different things that are coming up while we're trying to witness and be with what's coming up in that processing. We can ask the client, like, real simple interweaves, like, is this manageable? Can you stay with this? Right? Or you're doing a great job. Can you stay with this? I'm here with you. You know, different things. You can slow down as needed. You need the system to be able to work with this and digest this, right? So we can always slow down the work. We can ask, what would you like to share, right? If we get to an Excel, what would you like to share? And take more time with the witnessing, even if we have to kind of draw back from the BLS and just be like, wow, I think we're with a really wounded part here. What would you like to share? And let's give time for this to be shared, or we're with a wound here, let's give time. And then asking the client, are you getting this? Are you getting this, right? What's coming up for you? Like, this is a big deal. Are you getting this? And then we can retrieve and unburden. We prevent overwhelm with self to part relationships. So if there's self there, self has a huge window of tolerance. So we can go slow and gentle. We want to get as close to these parts as possible, and we want to extend the self energy. How is this part responding? Is this part of where you are there? Make sure there's a connection. We've often worked with clients and it's like, or I'll get a lot of consultees come in, or people come with questions and like, I don't know if they really were connecting with what was happening. So you help and facilitate that connection using self energy. And then you make sure, again, does this make sense? Are you getting this? You're doing great. Encourage, move that on. You can do do-overs in this phase. If the exhale is stuck in a past scene, have the self enter the scene and be with the exhale in the way that didn't happen. You're not doing magic here, right? It didn't happen, but was needed. So the system can get a felt sense of what it was like if somebody did come in and protect them, or did come in and take them out, or did come in and love them, or tell them they're okay, or soothe them. What would that felt sense be? So you can take time to do these do-overs. And then you address the concerns, but you can retrieve that part, bring that part into the present, right? And what needs to happen in order to help this part come back into the present. And then the part can go to a safe, chosen place, like the chamber of our heart, in present time with self, to a cozy room, playground, a place in nature, wherever that part wants to go, that's a safe, more present focused place. And that can be really powerful for clients, these retrievals and these do-overs. And then we go through the body scan, like we see, are there residuals in the body? Have the client really check in. We can go back and process those. And when they have processed and really unburden the wounding of whatever targets we're working with, whatever parts we're working with, we bring back the embodiment of the gifts. What qualities do you want to bring in your body and your energy system now? Let's take some time and fill the space where the burdens were with these qualities, and have the client do it in their imagination in a way that works and is meaningful for them. It's such beautiful work. I go so in depth in this. It's so beautiful, but giving all of you an idea and a taste of all this and how you could integrate this. And then you appreciate all the parts that have allowed the work, and then you debrief and you work on concerns around the work. You can use peaceful place, container, somatic closing techniques at the end of sessions. And you set meaningful intentions for going forward, and you check back. You keep checking back. It's a dynamic, like evaluating the work, evaluating the shifts. How is the internal system now? And that's such a big piece too, really integrating the work and staying with. So I know I kind of went through that and whatever, but I see there's a lot of questions. So let's, whatever time we have left, where are we at? We're kind of right at time. Do we have a couple minutes for a couple?
Yeah, let's take maybe a few minutes to answer one question, which has like 11, a vote from Mustafa.
Yes.
And if you want, you can also end the screen share so we can see everyone.
Oh, yes.
And
Thank
yeah.
you. Thank you for the reminder. There
Mhm.
we go.
And
Hello, hello, hello.
mhm.
Okay.
He asks, IFS talks about not using grounding strategies
Mhm.
when a part is risking overwhelming the patient, whereas a lot of the therapies being used with EMDR often attempt to get patients grounded before continuing desensitization. When a part is risking overwhelming, how do you approach this? Do you pause the desensitization and do some unburdening through talk, or continue the process of desensitization?
Ah, what a beautiful question. You're right. Richard Schwartz has named pretty specifically, he's like, that we ground too much and that it sends the message to the system that let's just exhale again, right? Like let's just escape that. And so in a way it can be colluding, especially in the middle of like what's coming up for the client. It can be colluding with like, yeah, get that away, that's too much. So there is an essence of that. So the first thing I'll say and is one, you want to know, is my client reliving it? Does my client have some dual awareness? That is still important. Like if my client is so in this that they are reliving it and they can't even connect with me, like if I ask them, hey, is this manageable? And they look like they're in some trance state and they can't even answer you, then at that extreme of a response, right, we want to pull them back. So you are going to pull them to attune with you again and then spend some time with what came up, what happened, and are there concerns, what's happening. So because we do, and it's not really just pulling them out, it's giving space for it, but do not continue using BLS and just plow past if somebody is really, they can't even connect to you. But most of the time they can. So I'll ask, hey, is this manageable, and see if they connect back to me. Because if they can answer, they are still there at some level. And so in that conceptualization, we often pull them out too much because our parts are nervous that they're abreacting. Our parts are nervous that they're having so many sensations. So you want to relax your parts back. And then you may just need to tune in more, lean in more. You can use interweaves, and you can absolutely stop the BLS, or at least for now, pause it. Because give a moment for that to be, right? If they're going through a lot of body sensations, or they're crying, or they're in this really big, emotional place, give them encouragement. Like, hey, this is your body. Your body knows what to do, right? Lean in, but you don't just, I don't find it useful to just keep going. That I know that in EMDR they say like keep going. Well, there are times you can, and you do move through that. But in some of this, and when it's a really deep wound that's coming out, I want to give it some witnessing. So I will like just pause the BLS and make sure that the client's really kind of digesting, moving through, especially with body sensations, and really like visceral emotional experiences. It's like, yes. And so there's that might be a part of me, but a part of me is like, yes, let's do this, right? So, but attunement, I make sure we're reconnecting, that they're processing, that they're getting this. And I'm like, take as much time as you need. This is so important, right? This is beautiful. Like, let this come, let it be with, and let me know if you're struggling with that, whatever it is. So you do more interweaving and you help them move through until they're at a place and they've kind of, you and the client have like, okay, this has been digested, and you intuitively feel like, okay, we can move on. Then you could bring it back to the BLS, or you can go back to target. So I hope that kind of answers that. I mean, there's so much to that question, but it's such a good question. And that is kind of the conceptualization of that. But if they are fully, like I said, they can't even connect with you, then you're going to want to pause and do whatever you can to help the client. But sometimes it's just giving that space to let it move through is all that's needed. Beautiful question.
Unfortunately, friends, we are absolutely out of time, and this is where we will land. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Stacy. You all are awesome, and so sorry we didn't get to all of your questions, but know that we see you, we acknowledge you. Thank you so much for your presence. We'll see you back in just a few minutes. Take care, everyone. Thank you, Stacy. Thank you, Liv. Bye-bye.